Hey. This is one of those other projects I've been doing in place of the peach doll because I'm a master procrastinator. Also, it's really hot where I live right now, so if I want to record clean audio, I've got to set my fans away from me or just outright turn them off because the microphone's going to pick that up. So yeah, I live in the devil's butt crack. I am sizzling up, kinda, but I do this all because I love you guys. Kiss me! Why do I do this? Hey friendles, I'm Kendall and I have the bad habit of reaching for sweets as soon as I wake up in the morning because my sleep schedule is an absolute mess in the summer and because nobody can reasonably sleep when it's this hot outside. Anyway, speaking of segues, Digital Circus episode 2. Oh boy, that sure was a kick to the nuts, wasn't it? As soon as I saw Gummigoo, I knew I had to make an action figure of him because popular stuff is the only thing that survives the YouTube algorithm, and in my head this is going to be easy. Wondering why it took me 4 months after the release of episode 2 for me to do anything Digital Circus related? Well, if you keep up with any of my other videos, you would have seen I had some other freelance work I had to do, one of which I'll actually be revisiting in the future on and off very soon. But anyways, for now, let's get into Gummigoo. The first thing I did was drew some concept art of how I'd want Gummigoo to move in relation to Pomni. The Pomni doll I made is obviously very stylized, but I found that Gummigoo has no issues being show accurate when it comes to movement. That is also because I had a specific way in mind that I wanted to print him. Once I was satisfied with how he'd potentially move, I started with the orthographic image. And thankfully that was pretty simple as Gummigoo has a pretty simple design. When drawing the orthographic image, I actually kept in mind some vinyl figurines that you might see in the mass market, and I also went back and referenced Moonlight Jewel's Bean doll that she made a couple years ago. It probably seems kind of odd that I'm talking about vinyl figurines when I'm usually the type to make ball-jointed dolls in regular resin, but that's because I'll be using flex resin to print Gummigoo. GM. Once I was satisfied with my orthographic image, I imported it into ZBrush. I imported a square, I turned that square into a rectangle because that was going to be my height reference, and then I started the blockout phase. I've explained this before, but I'm going to explain it again because I have no idea how many new people are going to show up per video, but the blockout phase is basically just taking simple shapes and stretching them into some simpler, not so simple, extended, different, organic shapes. The point is that you're making a very simplified version of whatever you're trying to make with some simple shapes. And in this case, I was using a bunch of spheres. Since Gummigoo is probably the least complicated thing I've sculpted on this channel, some of his parts were somewhat of a one and done. As you can see with his eye, I imported a ring, and then I imported a sphere, and then I flattened the sphere, and now I have his eye. Some things, like the fingers and the eyebrows, I used the bend curve to get the proper shape, while other things, like the arms and legs, were extended with spheres, although I initially did try a cylinder. But still, I found that the best organic shapes are made with spheres. Or maybe that's just what I'm used to. As previously mentioned, I do use the bend curve function on occasion. It can be very helpful for moving things like this arm, for instance, long distances, versus using the move tool, as I found that the move tool can be kind of impractical for certain arcs and long distances. I most often use it to make fingers, using like an oblong shape, but this time for the fingers I ended up using a rectangle. Looking at this footage, I'm not sure why I remember myself struggling with the back spikes, but what I remember doing to make these is I had a cube at a very low subdivision, and then I took the Z modeler tool and I clicked on the 2 points on the way back of the spine, brought them closer together, and that's how I made the spine. Just duplicated the rectangle multiple times over down the spine, and then you have a spine. Well, technically they're probably like scales or something. I mean, it's down the spine, you know what I mean. Going into this, I knew pretty much how exactly I was going to make the base version of the hat. I just took a plane with a low subdivision, made the plane look roughly brim-shaped, and once I was satisfied with the brim shape, I just extruded it with the Z-modeler tool a few times, one time to make the actual brim, and then another time to make the actual body of the hat. I couldn't think of a word, so I'm assuming it's body. Doing that all, you get the general shape of a hat. Later on is when the details are going to come on, and if I remember correctly, I ended up detailing the hat twice because I didn't like it the first time. Once everything I needed was made, I just merged and unified everything that needed to be merged and unified together. So in this case, I needed to merge and unify the body parts and the spine parts, and the brow and the eyes, except I did keep the eyes and brows separate, it seems, in this footage. I also unified the arms and legs with their respective parts. And the explanation for this footage is going to come out a bit strange because what I'm trying to do here is make the belly patch, and I did it in a way that was very unoptimal and just outright wrong. I used a carving tool to carve in the dent, and then I tried to Z-remesh it to make it clean. But I really didn't need to do that, so I'm just going to fast forward and explain how I did it right. So after merging all the relevant needed body parts together for this part of the project, that being the head, the body, the spine, the tail, I took the masking pen and I simply just masked out where the belly patch is going to be. After I masked out the belly patch, I went to the polygroups menu and I clicked polygroup mask, and that gave me a clean polygroup of just the belly. I then Z-remeshed the polygroups and made sure that the polygroups only had 2 polygroups, as you can see by him looking like Barney for a split second. And then I clicked the, I'm blanking on the tool, just give me a second. And then I clicked the Z-modeler tool, set it to extrude, and extruded the belly patch. I did that a few times until I was satisfied before moving on to detailing some excruciatingly small details. I typically go into detail because my meticulous nature sees errors in everything I do, despite how detailed the work is. But going into detail for something like the hands helps breathe some more life into the hands, because they would look pretty unnatural otherwise. Then again, Gummigoo's hands were actually quite simple this time around, as well as the feet. Adding some details like the natural folds just adds a little something to the characters. So this is the part where I talk about how I jointed Gummigoo, using these little nubby things that you typically will see in vinyl figurines. But as you can see from the footage, I don't have footage of me making these little nubby things, because the first time I tried to do this process, my computer crashed. My god, because it's so hot in here! Anyways, I'll try to give the best explanation I can, even though it's probably not going to match up with the footage, but I'm just going to work with what I got. So I took the little nubby things, and the nubby things were initially like a cylinder, and I extruded a ring around the cylinder to give it this T-shape, and then I put them in their proper places around the body where I knew I wanted the holes. I made them like bigger by 5 points, and then I clicked Boolean, and then I had like holes all over the body, because all I really wanted was the holes in the body. My plan is to basically hollow out the body, and by booleaning these holes open, I'm able to just select the created polygroups from booleaning these holes inside the body, and just completely deleting them. And after completely deleting them, I can go and take the Z-modeler tool, click extrude, and then extrude it on the inside to create this like inner shell on the inside of the figure. As you can probably see right now, because I'm dissolving it with a smooth brush, this like interior, smaller, more alien looking thing of Gummigoo right now. The poor boy. Looks like he's been through so much. But the point is, I'm hollowing this out because I want to learn how to use less resin and make my things less heavy. But also, I found this to be the most practical thing I can do with me wanting to use flex resin and everything, but you're going to find out how that worked out very soon. Jointing the arms and leggies was a similar process. I took the little arm and leg nub thingies and I arranged the polygroup in a way so I can delete the polygroup that's facing in the, I almost said anterior, but technically it's the interior position. I guess I'm trying to be fancy. You know, there's like posterior, anterior, exterior. Technically it's the interior position, but I delete the internal polygroup on all of them, the arms and leggies while they're merged together. And then I take the Z-modeler tool and I extrude the inside so that they have an inner shell. It's a similar principle to making the body. I want it to be hollow inside so that it's lighter when it uses some flex resin, but also in general I need to make all of my toys lighter because when things are heavier, they're kind of hard to pose, and that's a problem when you're trying to take photos. You know, I've been learning that the hard way. But look at those fingies. They're so skinny. Oh yeah, I should mention that I take this smoothing brush and then I set it to sculptress mode. It's like a special mode in ZBrush that basically dissolves polygons into nothing. So you take sculptress and you dissolve the hard edges so that they're nice and smooth, and I did this everywhere because it makes the topology cleaner and there's going to be less printing errors, and when I put it into the printing software. This is just a good thing to practice doing on any model that you're making, especially if they're like natural formed models that have like hair curves and indents that overlap and things like that. And you know, I'm saying all this out loud and it makes perfect sense to me, but this is not going to make sense to somebody who's not as inclined with ZBrush as I am. Quick reminder that my videos are not tutorials. You're here to watch me suffer. But yeah, keep watching. The last thing I did on our boy was I made the hat. The second time. Well, technically I added details to this pre-made hat thingamajig that I made earlier in the footage. And really all that entailed was looking at Google every now and then to make sure that I was getting the shape right, and subdividing the hat a couple of times, and then sculpting in some details with my brushes. Pretty simple process, nothing to write home about, but like I said, I did it twice because I didn't like how I did it the first time. Similar to the body, it did have an internal component that I did need to go in and smooth down with the sculptress smoothing of the brush. And to make the ring around the hat, I took the masking pen, drew a ring around the hat, and then I extracted it, and if I decided I liked it, I just worked from there. And now I have a hat with a ring on it. He's a little cowboy. Or a bandit. A bandit cowboy. I also added a peg into the hat, so it would allow the hat to, in theory, be removable from a vinyl body. To make sure that it wouldn't pop out at random intervals, I extended the bottom of the peg so it's one of those like peggy things that you could squeeze in and squeeze out if you needed to. Oh boy, you're all gonna be surprised about how all this flex resin shenanigans ended up. 'Cause believe me, I sure was. I posed him so I could save some renders and post them online before exporting him from ZBrush into my printing software. You'll see that I have his back facing the printing plate because I had this idea where I was hoping that if I put some flex resin of one color into one side of the resin tank and then flex resin of another color on the other side of the resin tank, I could make an ombre throughout the body while still having the top of his head be yellow and the bottom of his tushy be green. But first I had to make sure this flex resin stuff was actually going to work with colorant. So I give it the good shakies, because you really do need to shake resins of all kinds before you use them. Brought out some colors. Gave those the shakies as well because they were kind of old. I think like 2018, so 6 years at that point. Jesus Christ. And then I added some colorants into the resin that I needed. And a hallway. Yeah, this is the most practical place I have in my living space where we can print stuff. And the good thing about summer is that it helps things print properly. Things tend to print better in the heat versus the winter, which is painful. Downside is the resin is very stinky, especially if it's the resin you have to wash with alcohol, but this one was surprisingly not as bad. Also, make sure one of your dogs intrudes in your space while you're trying to work. That's a very important part of the process.
George, go back. No, wait. Is that a
It doesn't matter. My concern is that his foot is in that container, so... Wash his foot, okay? Yes, the little stinker got his little stinky feet in a stinky container that I used to wash the stinky prints with alcohol. Yeah, don't worry, we made sure to wash his little feet. But he's a stinky. I was pretty hesitant at the idea of the colorants actually coloring the resin, mainly because I was worried any kind of difference in formulation would cause printing errors of some sort, so you can imagine my shock when it actually worked. Like, shiver me timbers, it actually worked. We can't let this solidified liquid gold go to waste, right? That sounded so much better in my head. Peeling it off, it was incredibly squishy. Like, I was not used to peeling off something like this. So the only thing left to do was to wash it and remove the supports and see how it was functioning. I gave it a wash in alcohol, just completely amazed that it was still squishy and that it was yellow colored and that the plan I was hesitant with, it worked. It actually worked. Pay attention to my words, because that's the thing we call foreshadowing. Now that I was sure the resin could be colored, I just went on to color the resin for the arms, well, one arm, and the leggies. I was going to save the body for last because the whole ombre thing, yeah, it was a bit intimidating, but also I just wanted to make sure that coloring this stuff actually worked. And considering the way I described doing the ombre was kind of a risk, I just decided that would best be saved for last. And considering how much runtime there probably still is in this video, you might be in for a surprise at the end. So there is a bit of an obvious hum-diddly-dum-drum conundrum when it comes to these flex resin pieces, and that's whether or not they can be sanded. And I can tell you right off the bat, you can carve the supports off, which is kind of satisfying, but knowing me, I tend to get a bit trigger-happy with an X-Acto knife. So I decided to ask my dear old friend the internet to see if there's any way to sand these pieces. And I found that there actually is a way to sand these pieces.
This one in the freezer.
I'll feel some break.
Me too.
You know what? You're going to spare me.
I'm trusting some random person's advice off the internet.
As you can see, sanding this frozen jelly, it worked. I was impressed. Well, it is one of those things where you tell someone and they're going to be like, yeah, in theory that works, but how does it work practically? So to do that, I had a bucket of ice water near me because this thing actually defrosted pretty quickly while I was sanding it. And as it stands, I prefer to do wet sanding anyway. So now that I knew that was working, it was time to print the rest of the body parts. Let's check out the green arms and leggies.
Okay, I initially wanted to show what the print was going to look like because I accidentally kicked the cord and unplugged the printer partway through, so it's an unfinished print, but instead I opened the printer to this. I guess those screws at the end are important for something. See, now I am far less concerned about potentially ruining a good print because this tells me that the print was useless. I gotta find the screws that go on the end.
This is your eternal reminder to do as I say and not as I do. I gave my resin take a good cleaning, and I also found the screws and put them in place. The screws are definitely there for more purposes than just the resin sticking to the bottom of the tank. I mean, you could technically use silicone to prevent that from happening as well. Hey, Sergey!
sound I just made, oh my god. Anyway, I know it looks very blue on camera, I don't know why that is, but I promise you it's green. But I do have an issue. I do not think I have enough resin to make the body. I do have more flex resin, but not very much. And the body is very large. I do have some yellow resin, but I don't think it'll be enough. That and I have to have a...
I kind of go off at this point about other technicalities when it comes to printing the body, and that's going to be really boring. It's just annoying filler footage, so I'm just going to move on to me tearing off the supports off the arms and leggies. The first thing I do after Gummy Nums has been printed and washed is I just take off all the supports with an X-Acto knife. And yeah, pretty self-explanatory. I guess the process though for taking off the supports, it's definitely different for sure than it is with solid resin, because with solid resin it kind of just like snaps. While with this, it feels like I'm carving into a vinyl Barbie doll head or something. It's flexible. But yes, I do this before putting them in the freezer to sand, because why would you want to try to sand off the supports like that? That doesn't make any sense. But anyways, instead of me showing you all the arbitrary cutting, I'm just gonna move on to the part where I tried to print the body the first time. As I explained earlier, I had this whole plan for the body, and I even had a diagram for it. Put one color in one end, one color in the other, set it to start printing, watched it start printing, and you'll see. Yeah, I've had resin stick to the tank before, but never like this. And that's not even counting the fact that the whole color thing I tried to make a nice gradient just outright didn't work. All I could do at that point was just try to press on, scrape it off of the printing plate and everything, and somehow get that piece of resin stuck inside the tank out without tearing the resin tank. Which I ended up doing anyway, no matter what I tried. While waiting for my new resin tank to arrive, I decided it'd be best if I just went back into ZBrush and separate Gummigoo into two pieces. The idea that I had in the moment was that if I did it this way, I could just print each piece in its respective colors, and then I would be able to have a Gummigoo body with two different colors. Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be an ombre, but I was kind of hoping the white patch would be enough for people to not notice. I also had this idea that maybe I could create the ombre if I glazed the body when it's put together with some excess flex resin. Because I know when people use clear resins, they will sometimes put the clear resin on top of their print to make it all shiny. So you're going to see later that that's kind of what I was going for some things. Opening ZBrush and fixing something obviously takes a lot less than the 3 days I was waiting for my resin tank, so I just went in and started painting the hat that I printed out, and I guess I forgot to say something about until now. Whoops. I painted the hat in multiple layers of a mix of gesso and white acrylic paint, and I don't know if this is true for any of y'all, but like, gesso, it feels like chalk to me, and I don't like that feeling when it's dry, you know? And like, acrylic just feels like plastic, so part of me thought, oh, what if I just mix them together and just use it, like, together? Maybe it'll be less chalky, but it'll be flexible, and maybe a little more waterproof too, because every time I try to sand gesso, it just dissolves into nothingness, waterness. I like to do wet sanding, okay, don't judge me. Stay healthy, everyone. This is a threat. I ate my snackies and then I continued painting and explaining that I'm painting with white acrylic paint and gesso while showing you guys a really long time lapse. It's going to become really repetitive and monotonous really quick, so I'm just going to move on to the part where I actually painted him in colors. As you can see in this footage, I now have the hat impaled on a pike. And I'll show you why that's going to be an issue. You know, I've definitely made this joke already, but this is a thing we call foreshadowing. At the time, I came to the conclusion that putting the hat on the pike like that just unnecessarily split the resin at the post. But thankfully this was easily fixed with a little more flex resin and some time in the UV light oven and some patience, which is going to be running really thin by the end of this video. While the post was curing, I mixed up a custom brown color to paint the hat. Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory with my sentence simple. Just take some brown and make it the right shade of brown. Having just fixed the post with some more flex resin, I knew I couldn't Gaddafi the hat onto a stick again like I initially did. So instead, I used pliers to hold the hat while painting it. Once I was satisfied with this opacity level of brown, I added some black to the same brown to make a darker, less saturated brown, and I used that to paint it around the ring of the hat. Painting the hat was simple enough, and by the time I was done with that, the new resin tank had arrived. Now that my new resin tank had arrived, I set it up as you do, remembering to keep the screws on it this time. And I was still kind of insistent on trying the whole ombre through the body thing. So I poured in the green resin, but then I also took some of the yellow resin I had and I poured some right into the middle of it, thinking that maybe this piece would print out with a nice ombre. Instead of printing them horizontal, I was actually printing them vertical this time, so in theory that could work. Maybe. You'll see. Speaking of foreshadowing, look at this. Look at this. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I guess you guys can probably guess, considering that this video is probably twice as long as the current runtime that the marker is at right now. God, I phrased that sentence so weird. Remember what I said earlier about some artists taking some clear resin and like glazing their 3D prints with it to make it all shiny? Well, I'm basically doing the same thing here, except I'm not trying to make it shiny. I'm trying to make sure that the crack is welded closed. Yeah, you'll see. The tushy has printed out, and I guess you guys can see that there's an obvious issue. Yeah, I know, the arms are bluer, while the tushy is olive greener. But I had an idea in my head. I told myself I could take the leftover green flex resin and just paint it over the blue arms and leggies, and that hopefully it'll get the arms and leggies to look closer in color to the tushy. You know, I learned something while doing this about flex resin. Flex resin and gel nail polish, they both seem to have something in common. And that's that even after being cured, they're both kind of sticky. Similar to how some gel nail polishes need to be wiped with alcohol after application, I ended up doing the same with these things after putting them in the UV light oven, and that definitely helped reduce the stickiness. Since that was done and I had nothing else to do while the rest of the body was printing, I got out the matte varnish and started painting the hat to make sure that all the paint is protected. I gotta admit, I was not sure how paint would hold up on flexible resin, but it actually seemed to hold on pretty well, but I'm gonna have my whole spiel on flexible resin soon enough. Look at that, the body is printed, yay! The next step is to put them together. But wait, I gotta show you something. See that? It's another crack. Okay, at the time I thought this one was completely my fault because I did try to shove in one of the arms to make sure that it was gonna move properly. And it did, but I'll have a more in-depth explanation on the cracks later. But for now, I just went back and got some of the old flex resin that's already colored and just started filling it into the cracks, hoping that it's gonna weld the cracks together, as it seems to have successfully done that with the arms, and a few other places. Foreshadowing. While I was fixing the cracks in the tushy, I just thought that I might as well try to put them together and put them in the UV lamp while I had the resin out. You know, just get those both done as soon as possible, see if they'll stick together. I was kind of naive to think that they would stick together with just resin. But you can bet your sweet tushy that I definitely tried before accepting that it isn't going to work and moving on and trying something else. This time I busted out my trusted wire and cut a few clips of that before shoving him into Gummigoo, right where his white belly patch would be. The idea is that the placement of the wires in the belly patch was going to be able to hide them while still securely keeping him in one piece. That was the idea, at least. Once he was as clutched together as I assumed he was going to get, I took some of the leftover resin, painted it over the place where both of his flexed resiny parts meet, hoping that it'll kind of blend in the color and hopefully make it a permanent closure. I'm trying not to spoil what's to come, but I just have a lot to say about flexed resin, I'm sorry. But the point is, I kind of went back and forth with yellow and green, hoping to make some kind of ombre while basically sticking the pieces together. And throughout this footage, I was also fixing more cracks that kept appearing on the body, and I kept having to stick the paintbrush inside of Gummigoo, and then he just kept going back and forth in the UV light. Y'all are gonna see, I promise. It's not... Oh man, I'm trying to... Okay. After essentially brute forcing him together, I took him outside to get him ready to spray him with some Mr. Super Clean, but I rubbed him against my legs because he was feeling kinda sticky, and don't do this, please. This is not safe. Do not rub resin into your clothes. If he's feeling sticky, just wipe it down with alcohol and a paper towel, but I ran out of paper towels. That's my excuse. Don't do as I say, not as I do, okay? I started to spray him with some Mr. Super Clean, because at that point I thought I was just going to have to stick his appendages together, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to be ready very soon. I can bring him to Harajuku Day LA tomorrow. So I sprayed him with Mr. Super Clean, hoping to get the same matte texture you see for Gummigoo in the show. Just kind of that matte gumminess, but it's not shiny gumminess, it's like matte gumminess made in Unreal Engine. So as you can imagine from all the times I've said foreshadowing in the past 30 minutes, that all those little cracks and everything kind of led up to something sort of big, for this project anyway. After some generous coats, I left him out in the sun to hopefully dry and let the sealant do its thing for about 40 minutes. But I did come back about 20 minutes later to just check on him, see how he's doing, it's hot outside, you know. And this is the point that completely ruined my life. I have no idea how this happened. Look at it. It's not melting, it's just that the crack here, there's a crack that opened. Ay is right. It does, which is why I'm trying to work fast. So hushy. Stupid dog, it's just me! So yep, it's over guys. I'm turning in the towel. Video's over. I'm leaving YouTube. Cue the outro. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description. Okay, I'm obviously joking, but yeah, this was a really unpleasant setback to say the least. So, I had a lot of feelings about it for sure. Would y'all believe that I was extremely unwilling to give up on this version of Gummigoo? Yeah, me too. Anyways, after bringing him inside and kind of just like not wanting to admit defeat, I pulled out my favorite clear glue. It's like this Scotch clear glue. I can't say glue. It's like this Scotch clear glue. It works really well, sets very quickly. So I said to myself, you know what? I'll just glue them together, hope nobody notices the cracks, and call it a day. Because I couldn't hold him for however long it would take him to fully stick together, I ended up zip tying him together and leaving him alone, hoping that that would work. But I think eventually, I don't know when exactly, I just decided, yeah, this isn't working. I should really start over. Not completely, though. Oh yeah, this happened to the hat. It's a little hard to see in the footage, but the interior of the hat is all cracked, likely from the heat. This is kind of the point where I gathered that flex resin seems to follow a similar principle to metal and glass in the heat. That being that if it's heated up too quickly, it has the potential to crack from the rapid expansion. Y'all may be reasonably wondering, after all the zip tying and gluing, how did that turn out for Gummigoo after everything I've done? To say I was disappointed is definitely an understatement. And as you can imagine, my plans to take him to Harajuku DLA did not happen the way I expected at all. I know with these kinds of failures it can become a little too easy to just get all depressed about it and everything. But I thought about that for a bit, and then I just thought to myself, what if I just take Pomni with me to Harajuku DLA? Things may not have worked out as I hoped, but Pomni and I still had fun at Harajuku DLA. We got to meet some cool vendors that let us take photos in their stands, and Pomni even got to meet Hard Decora, who is a very nice and really photogenic person. And saying this out loud, I realize I really have to upload some of the pictures I took. I've been procrastinating on it, and I gotta tag the relevant vendors because they were so nice to let me use their stands. Thank you very much. Moving on from all that though, some of you might be wondering what happens to toy prototypes that just don't work out. Well, I'll show ya. So, some of y'all might be wondering what happens to toy prototype things like this that don't work. I'll show ya. Oh, look at that. So that's the prototype box right there. Every prototype I've made in art school and before goes in that box. And as you can see, there's a lot. A lot of trials, a lot of errors. Yeah. Going back into ZBrush, knowing that I was going to have to print this dude in resin now, I extended the post on his head, and then I took all of the limbs and the big body piece and decided to split them all in half. My idea was that by splitting them in half, I could just put them together with some wood glue or something later, and that would probably be the most optimized way to prevent them from having any print lines. I know that there's probably going to be somebody in the comments that's going to say that I should have just made the arms and legs ball joints so it would have had greater mobility and everything. Probably would have been easier to pose and probably would have looked like a cleaner final product, but I was getting impatient, okay? Leave me alone. In all seriousness, doing it like this kind of gave me some ideas of how to approach the Sunny doll I made previously for Callan. I'll give a quick summary of that video since it is the least popular video on my channel, but I made a commissioned doll for the YouTuber Moon Bunnies, who's actually a friend of mine. I call them Callan because they are my friend. And I made this doll of their OC, and the doll ended up being far bigger than I expected. I'd never made a doll of that size before. So going into it, I did have a plan of what I was going to do, but printing it out, and I don't know if this is because of the size or because I honestly just need to get good at engineering, but certain parts of the doll were pretty heavy, and some ways that the doll printed out kind of left a lot of print holes that I wasn't happy with, and oddly enough, they're kind of stubborn to fill with epoxy. That's a whole other can of worms. But the reason why that's relevant to Gummigoo is because as I was working on Gummigoo, I was getting some ideas of how to better print and modify the Sunny doll to make a better Sunny doll with hopefully less print lines, more posability, and hopefully not be so heavy in some places because, yeah, the weight was kind of an issue. If a doll is too heavy in some places, it's not going to stand on its own, which is unfortunate, but it's also really hard to get it to stand on its own in general. You know, I have a lot of admiration for people in the corporate world who make doll engineering and stuff for a living. Y'all are really good at what you do. I want to learn from you. Please hit me up. The arms have printed out, And to optimize my time, I'm going to put them together while the body is printing. But look at this. See that bendy warpy thing? That's not very uncommon, unfortunately, when it comes to printing. That's what we call warping in the 3D printing world. And the reason that happens is because of temperature difference between the printer itself and the surrounding room. This is typically more of an issue during the winter, since, it's cold outside and printing in the warmth is a lot more ideal for 3D printing. In my case, it's really hot summer, and I think the reason this happened is because the side that warped happens to be near the entrance of the living room, and the living room is usually the coolest place in the apartment because, it's incredibly hot outside. It's kind of funny that I say that because my room is pretty hot and the air conditioner doesn't work and I have 2 fans going at all times, but if I want to do a proper voiceover, I need to put those fans behind me and hope that they don't get picked up by the microphone. I do this for you guys. But anyways, I cut off all the supports, and I began to put them together with wood glue. Of course, I needed to let those dry before putting any kind of epoxy to fix the fungus or anything like that. Because of the warping, Gummigoo did need me to sculpt an entirely new fungus for him. Wood glue maintains a pretty strong bond and doesn't take too long to dry, thankfully. Downside is it can be reactivated with water. Usually warm water, but it can be reactivated. After letting the pieces dry, waiting for them to be all stucky together and everything, I went in and started sculpting Gummigoo a new fungus. And while sculpting him a new fungus, I also went and filled in some gaps that were created by the warping. Because, now the pieces don't properly fit together. I guess because I was getting a little impatient, I kind of decided to just fill the gaps and sculpt the finger all in one go, but the problem with doing that is that you're inevitably going to squish something that's still not done curing yet. So yeah, my mistake. After doing a task like this, I didn't really have anything else to do other than wait for the body to print. So some of you might be wondering, Canders, what do you do when you have nothing else to do that would reasonably bring progress to a project? So I guess depending on the project, whether it's a video project like this or something for a client, if I have nothing else to do that would reasonably bring the project forward, I work on some other project. But in a case like this video, I actually painted the background that I used at the beginning and the endings of this video. Other things I'll do is I'll edit the footage, but if I have absolutely nothing else to do, I'll do something like wash my doggies. Jorbo, look at me. You're stinky. It's bath time. Jorbo! Okay, George, we're gonna give you a bath. You're so smelly. This puppy. Oh, where'd she go? She was watching. She probably doesn't want to watch what she's next. Buddy, I got the doggy wipes for your little face. Come on. Oh, the water's not draining properly. I don't want to get this wet. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, I heard that too. Spread. All right. For a second, I gotta get some new gloves. After washing the puppies, all the pieces are printed and it's time to put them together. But as you can see with Gummigoo's body, it had a similar issue to one of the hands, that being that it also warped a bit. No matter, that can be fixed. The arms and leggies are in one piece, which is good. As you can see, the hat still has its post, and that poses an issue that for some reason I didn't fix in ZBrush. Being that all these pieces are printed in solid resin, there is no way that the hat can be easily popped in and out without potentially breaking the rest of the toy. To remedy this, I brought out my Dremel, and yes, I started dremeling indoors. I don't usually recommend doing this, but I think I found a way to do this without potentially harming anybody. Wet sanding is the best kind of sanding, if you ask me. But anyways, I dremeled off the post, and this took quite a while, so I eventually stopped recording until I dremeled it off completely. Once that was done, I took a round Dremel head and used that to give the inside of the hat a good sanding so the surface is nice and smooth. In that time, I did have an idea of what I wanted to do with the hat and the post to make it a removable hat. You'll see. While I still had the Dremel out and some sandpaper, I just went in and decided to give the pieces a good sanding, just to make sure they fit together all nicely. There is this thing about computers where if you build a model a certain way, it might look like it works on the computer, but in real life it might not fit together as perfectly. So I'm just doing this to ensure that they're all going to come together nicely. Also, listen to this. Yeah, that's like some anti-ASMR, just really grating to listen to, so those few seconds were probably really irritating. Imagine how I felt being the person sanding all these. At least the support holes are less visible now, I guess. Now that all the pieces are sanded, it's time to put them all together. And in order to do that, I need to put magnets in the hat. I made myself a sneak of epoxy and wrapped it around the bottom of the post and encased the magnet in the post. I eventually added some more epoxy into the post itself to make it more secure inside of Gummigoo so that it would hopefully never come out. After that, I eventually just made some more epoxy and put the epoxy into the hat, stuck the magnet in, and now you have a removable magnet and hat setup thingy. Also, whenever you're working with magnets, always remember to keep the magnetized stuff that you just put inside of it, you know what I mean. Keep them separate because they're going to gravitate to each other and it's going to ruin your hard work if the epoxy is still curing. Also, always remember to put something on at least one side of each magnet just so you know the direction that they're supposed to face, because I've made a mistake regarding that more than once. Once the epoxy had cured, it was time to assemble all of the pieces. Using my favorite wood glue, I just dabbed it on the edges and tied the body together with zip ties, while adding repeated layers of wood glue to hopefully fill the gaps as best as possible. I use wood glue because I did mention earlier it's got a pretty strong hold. It does have the downside of reactivating with water, but it's actually very easily sandable when it's fully dry. Wood glue is very good for getting things to stick together, but when it comes to filling gaps smoothly, it does have a tendency to shrink as it dries. So I put Gummigoo in some yoga poses and decided to take some epoxy to hopefully fill the gaps. I do have my feelings about epoxy. I think it's a good sculpting medium for sure. In my opinion, it sands at a much slower rate than other materials, so when trying to blend it in to make it smooth with another material, and in this case that would be epoxy and resin, the result is not always as smooth as I would hope. But that's just me, and I'm sure there's different varieties of epoxy that are probably a lot softer. The epoxy I have is actually epoxy I got for free from my art school, during the time that I was a student. And while some people might ask why I don't just buy a softer form of epoxy, I'm not going to spend money to get a brand new version of something that I already have. I sanded his body off camera because I'm not going to waste my phone's memory on something so redundant. And then I started priming him with a mix of acrylic paint and gesso. I already did my whole rant about gesso on its own, but yeah, you just keep painting, paint it all over, and pose them in funny positions. After some painting, I noticed that there was a glaring issue with how the epoxy blended into the resin, and it's not very good. Maybe I'm not as great at sanding as I like to think, or maybe the epoxy just has a different sanding rate than the resin. But I knew I had to bust out my Dremel and go back to sanding some of these epoxy parts, hoping that I can get it smooth. But as I was doing the Dremel sanding, I did have a thought, wondering to myself, what if I just looked for some kind of gap filler? Because, you know, there is that wood gap filler stuff that they use to fill gaps in tables. So I went on the internet and I found that the exact thing I was talking about does exist. It's called plastic wood filler. So I ordered it online and had to wait 3 days. Having to wait for the wood filler to arrive and not really having anything else to do, I decided to modify a dress that was kind of ill-fitting, so I just made it fit me better, and I also added some pockets. And I know there's going to be people in the comments telling me that I probably could have gone to a hardware store and bought the same wood filler. And you see, I thought the same thing not long after I ordered it. But look at my dress, it fits wonderfully now and it has pockets. While waiting for the gap filler to arrive, I just went on to paint the hat. Again. Kind of funny, I painted the flex resin hat earlier, and now I'm painting the regular resin hat now. This time around, I ended up using a hairdryer to help dry the layers of paint in between coats because I was getting impatient. Once the base color was completely opaque, I added some black to the base color and just painted on the stripe that goes around the hat. And once that was done, I varnished the hat, this time using the hairdryer because, again, impatience. But also the hairdryer is surprisingly helpful if you need to get something done quickly. After a couple days of waiting, the plastic wood filler has arrived. Let's give it a try. I put a little dollop on a piece of vellum and started to apply it with one of my sculpting tools. And just as it's named, it applies really quickly, it's good for filling gaps, works just as advertised. My only pet peeve, and this is totally on me, is that when it dries, it has this sandy texture that I really don't like the feeling of. But I think that's just me being autistic. I don't like the feeling of chalk or pastel or dried gesso either. But still, it works pretty well. It starts to dry pretty fast, so you have to apply it quickly. And after a couple hours, it should be sandable. After about an hour or so, I went in and started sanding it, and this was kind of my mistake. I ended up sanding it a bit too early. It's not that it was still moist, it's just it just kind of collapses very easily if you sand it too early. So while it did have an overall smooth finish when I was sanding it the first time, I did opt to put a second coat, layer, I'm not sure, of this wood filler onto the gaps, and then I decided to leave it overnight afterwards and sand it again, and that ended up doing the job pretty well. After all the gap filling and sanding and gessoing that I did off camera because I was getting tired of recording redundant processes, it was time to paint him. To get started, I just mixed up my custom colors, which was basically a lighter yellow and a foresty green kind of green. And I mixed those up on a sheet of cotton vellum that's placed on top of a wet paper towel. Some of you doll ring painting enthusiasts might actually recognize this method of keeping these paints nice and moist from the repaint doll artist Delightful. She's a very talented artist, and she's actually the person I got this method of keeping the paints moist from. In her initial set of directions, she said that you're supposed to use some tracing paper, and I actually have tried this with tracing paper before, instead of using cotton vellum to keep the paints moist by letting the water seep through the paper and keeping the paints all squishy. But the thing is, I found the tracing paper to be a bit too fragile when it came to this method, so when I would try to like swipe the brush in my paints, the paper would kind of just tear apart, so I kind of just gave up on it and didn't do it again. But then when I was digging around for the tracing paper to see if I could give it one more try, I actually found this pad of cotton vellum that used to belong to an ex-boyfriend who gave it to me because he said he wasn't going to use it anymore. And even though we're not dating anymore, thank you, that was very helpful. It ended up being very helpful many years later if you just happen to be watching this for some reason. You know who you are. I did this whole painting session in one sitting over the course of about 4 hours, because, again, impatience, but also because I had the hairdryer with me, and yeah, like I said, impatience, I just really wanted to get this done as soon as possible because I was frustrated with the fact that it failed the first time with the flex resin. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever be using flex resin again. Also, if my camera ever seems to just randomly shake while I'm painting, it's because my dog George, he likes to go in and out of my room, but he can never make up his mind on whether or not he wants to come in or go out, or if he wants to stay, or whatever, and his path of direction just happens to be right under my camera stand. Thank you, Georgie. I love you. The white belly patch was the last thing I painted onto Gummigoo because I convinced myself that the white was going to be opaque enough to cover any mistakes that I made, because clearly while trying to make an ombre I went outside the lines. And thankfully it was, so I guess there was no issue. Once all the painting was done, I gave him a couple coats of varnish in combination with the hairdryer, and this time I used a mixture of matte and shiny varnish. The idea behind this was because the texture for Gummigoo, it seems to be more satin shaded. I know that the show is rendered in Unreal Engine, but this is the closest texture I could think of. So I just mixed the matte and the shiny varnish together, and the result ended up looking pretty nice. And now that that's done, it's time for assembly. And after all that work, he came out pretty nice. Looks pretty good, nice and shiny. And while I can no longer take him to Harajuku de LA, at least not this month, I could take him out to go meet my cousin. The day after I finished him, me and my brother went to go see my cousin at her house. And we all had a good time together, you know. We went out to lunch, we went out shopping, and I got to pose Gummigoo in a few places. Downside is that I was developing an ear infection for a few days prior to that, and I didn't pay it any mind, but this day the pain got particularly bad. But despite that, Gummigoo got to meet some other family members as well. He got to meet my uncle's tortoise. Her name is Cleopatra, by the way. She's very nice, so he got to be more acquainted with some other members of the reptilian family. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yo creo que se lo quiere comer.
No. No.
Ay, quedó bien. Ya ve.
No. God, that made me so nervous. I must confess, I wasn't really expecting to do an impromptu photo shoot, especially not without a doll stand, but I made it work and we had a good time. But when I got home, I knew he needed a doll stand. You know, I for some reason never think to make a doll stand until after a project is over. But thankfully I can always MacGyver one really quickly. Pomni's doll stand was adjustable, while this one was not made to be adjustable. Instead, it was just made to be stable. So I took a PVC pipe, cut it in half, and I used that as the base. And then I took another PVC pipe and placed it on top with epoxy. And I used epoxy at the bottom of the PVC pipe to hopefully give it some more weight, and also to make sure that it has a smooth bottom, because when I made Pomni's doll stand, the wood dowels did not allow for a smooth bottom. I used a hot needle to poke a hole in the top dowel, and then I added some wire to hopefully support his leggies. Once I was satisfied with the doll stand I made, I ended up just decorating it with some green string, because that was the best thing I could think of on short notice. And once that was finished, that's when me and my mom decided to go to IKEA. Mainly for some shopping, not really, but also to do a photo shoot because they have some really nice backdrops. We're going on an adventure. Bringing Gummigoo and Pomni to this IKEA photo shoot, I initially arrived with 70% battery, and by the time me and my mom were done and eating lunch, I had 1%. And the irony of me telling you this is when I took my photo shoot with Pomni, I arrived at IKEA with 20% battery and was able to use it until that phone was at about 10%. So yeah, it seems like I'm gonna probably need to get a new phone eventually. I use my phone as my camera, but I'm trying to be conservative with my monies. I had a great time taking a bunch of these pictures, though we did end up going to IKEA on a Saturday, so it was kind of crowded, especially the kids section. But it was great to see all the children who liked what I had made, and they seemed to be wanting to admire it and even play with it. That was just so heartwarming, and oh, it was so kind and so cute. So I have one story about one little boy when it comes to these pictures in front of the little tent at IKEA. I placed Gummigoo and Pomni in front of the tent because I thought, oh, it's a circus tent, perfect picture. And this little boy comes up and he picks up Gummigoo and then he crawls into the tent. And for some artists, this would probably be heart attack inducing, but for me in the moment, it was just like this great feeling of seeing that my target audience for my future products loves what I've created. Because ultimately, I went to school and I do what I do because I want to make consumer products, not just for kids, but for adults, collectors, just everybody to enjoy. Because I just generally think you're never too old to have toys. The kid's father was very, very nice. He complimented my work and he had his child give me back Gummigoo. And everybody there was just so nice and so sweet when it came to complimenting my work. I was just kind of getting flustered, and it was just a really nice and amazing experience, especially considering that I feel like I've dealt with a lot trying to get a career going. I'm going to speak very briefly on this, but I do have stories about being interviewed and ghosted by multiple companies, more times than I can count. And this will eventually be a topic on its own in another video, but I have faced discrimination in corporate jobs on 2 different occasions. One of which I have absolute proof for in emails, but if I were to retell this story, I would not show any documentation. I would keep everybody in the story, good and bad, and companies, just all completely anonymous, and just try to keep the story as like a learning experience instead, and kind of as one of those like harsh reality of life kind of things that you just kind of have to learn to accept. I know, it sucks. World's not perfect. And you know, it's because of instances like this that I've experienced that I kind of hope to one day start my own company. Not necessarily just a toy company, but like a entertainment and products and just make people happy and help people kind of company. Just kind of change all the bad that I've seen and make something good. So as you can imagine, the encouragement that I got by complete strangers throughout my time at IKEA recently, it was definitely something I needed in the moment. There was another person at IKEA also who was very kind, very encouraging. They liked my work, and they were actually an employee. They came up to me and my mom because they saw me taking some pictures at some of their displays in the kids section. They asked if they could take a few pictures as well because they did recognize the characters, and they said that their sister is a huge fan of the Amazing Digital Circus. And just to have that happen, it's just such an amazing feeling. And if their sister and them happen to be watching this video, hi, I remember you guys, and I'm going to remember an encounter like that forever. Because my phone ended up dying so much quicker than I thought, I didn't end up taking as many photos as I hoped at IKEA, but I instead just kind of took Gummigoo with me and went out and about on successive days and ended up taking pictures at whatever spot I thought looked cool. Just the other day, I'd gone to therapy and I brought Gummigoo with me, and I decided to take some photos in the outdoor section of the mall and also at the kids' playground because I thought it was pretty cool. It's a good idea to always just explore your environment, explore the places that you commute to frequently, because you never know what could make a good backdrop. I hope you guys enjoyed this whole process. Even though from what I can see of the timestamp in my editing software, it's over an hour long. But still, the work was all pretty worth it, and I really like how Gummigoo came out. Hopefully I'll be able to do more of the Amazing Digital Circus characters in the near future, but I do have some other projects I also want to get to. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description for my Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and many other social media sites. If you'd like to see more of my work or would like to hire a freelancer for your project, please check me out at CordeliaLibelle.com. That's KORDELIAHLIBELLE.com, and contact me through the listed email. I hope you're all doing well, and if no one told you today, the world wouldn't be the same without you. Know that you're valued and you make my world a better place every day. These holidays just recently passed, but I just wanted to wish you all a happy Memorial Day, happy Flag Day, blessed Eid al-Adha, happy Juneteenth, blessed Ashura, and if I don't finish editing this video by the 19th, happy 15th of Av. And shalom everyone!